In 2025, is it still worth starting your service accommodation business? Even with the landlords that are stuck in their ways, they get convinced by that. There's a difference between convincing and actually them understanding what you're doing. Systemizing is not being hands off. Systemizing is the hotel industry. This is why they're so big, because they've mastered that. If I had this mindset when I first started, believe you me, in my stage right now, I'd have so much more money than I do right now. You see, if you're willing to learn, if you have the right temperament, you have the right mindset to build a team, in this video, I'm gonna break it down to you guys. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Fella, started a service accommodation business close to 6 years ago now, and I've scaled to nearly 100 units. Now, those are units, not all of them are mine. Some of them are managed, some of them I've got for other clients, some of them we do rent to rent, and some of them we bought. Yeah. When I started my service accommodation journey till now, actually changed. From the top of my head, there's a lot more competition. You know, the cliche thing like, oh yeah, just get an apartment in Birmingham City Centre and just put an Airbnb with minimal design. You know, that used to work. Now you could probably get an apartment in central London, best location ever, and you probably still make a loss. For example, Airbnb guests, you know, because of the high competition now, there's a lot more people doing it, and the standards are higher. So Airbnb guests also become accustomed to these high standards. So you can't just have a needy cleaning team. You can't just have a decent design. You can't just have, with no parking, for example, and you expect to just receive the best bookings. You know, lots of guests now, they know the system, they've booked a lot of Airbnbs. Airbnb is now like a mature market. So at the end of the day, a lot of guests know what they could get elsewhere. So if you're not meeting up to the standard of your competition, you know, you're gonna fail in this industry. You know, things like local councils, they become more privy to this. So they're becoming more hot on if your neighbor complains to them about your Airbnb. You know, in the UK, still somewhat of a gray area with the regulations. However, believe you me, there are regulations coming in. It's not become widespread in the whole country. However, in certain cities, you know, there is a lot of regulation. For example, in Birmingham, right? Birmingham is not a city where service accommodation is regulated as such. However, we had one property, right? It was one of our best performing properties. However, neighbor bought the property. They didn't like the fact that different people was coming in and out of the house next door to them on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. They complained to the council. You know, even though it took a few months, right? The council put us sui generis, and we couldn't let it out after that. We had to give it back to the landlord. You know, we lost out on that property. And if we bought that property, that would have been a huge loss, because, you know, I would have been buying it based off my Airbnb income rather than buy-to-let income, for example. Now, Airbnb is still an amazing business to start, you know, especially for those of you who don't have much capital to probably put down, like a deposit for a house, for example. It's still a great great business to start. Well, one of the main things is you don't need to own the property. You don't need to have a 25%, 5%, £25,000 deposit in order to get an Airbnb. You can just simply do rent to rent. Manage to convince landlords, agents out there that will let you use their property as a service accommodation. The profit margins are higher, way higher than buy to let. Sometimes it competes with some HMOs. Sometimes some HMOs is even higher than HMO. You know, demand across the country, the world for Airbnb are rising. A lot of people now refusing to go with hotels. They'd rather go with Airbnbs, because, you know, before it was the fact that they could cook in the property. Now a lot of hotels are smarting up to this, but people are still choosing to go with Airbnb, because Airbnb now has just become like a buzzword. So they don't book hotels anymore, they book more Airbnbs, you know, because Airbnbs tend to be nicer. They're not sharing like a building with different people. You know, you have your private entrance. A lot more people are booking with Airbnb, and Airbnb themselves as a platform, their marketing has gone crazy. So at the end of the day, you know, if you're on their platform and you're a good host, you will get a lot of bookings, you know. And lastly, you can systemize a lot of the work. Because it's an online business, right, you can get things like virtual assistants. You can have cleaners that you literally chat to on WhatsApp. So you don't need to physically have maybe an office. You know, a lot of traditional business like estate agents, they have offices where they need to be there every time. They need workers on ground. You know, with Airbnb, if you're just starting, you can systemize a lot of the work. With all of that being said, right, the people who actually treat service accommodation like actual business, right, are the ones that are going to win in 2025 in this industry, right? Now, for those of you who shouldn't start a service accommodation business, if you're not willing to learn, please don't start a service accommodation business. If you're not willing to try and, you know, actually have a business mind, you know, you're just trying to come into it for a quick buck, you know, for a get rich quick scheme, you know, thinking you're going to have everything passive straight away and everything's just going to be hands off, please don't start. I see a lot of people getting into service accommodation business, right? From day one, they've got a management company. Now, yeah, you can have a management company, but the management company is probably going to be making more money than you do. because you might make profit sometimes, but almost guarantee a lot of the time you're going to be making a loss if you don't own the property. So if you do rent to rent and then you're passing it over to a management company, probably going to be breaking even or making a loss on most months. However, if, for example, you own the property and you're passing it to a management company, that's a bit different, because at the end of the day, your rents tend to be, your mortgage tends to be lower than rents, right? You don't have to deal with a team, build a team, deal with cleaners, deal with guests. If you don't have the right temperament to deal with this, or you don't know anyone, and you're willing to bring part of your team that knows how to do these things, I'd advise you against starting a service accommodation business, because at the end of the day, you're going to be very, very stressed. I'll be honest, I've been there. I'm not the best at dealing with guests. I can put my hand up. Elia is better than me. I'm better at dealing with landlords, speaking to agents. However, if you don't have anyone on your team that can do these things, or you're not willing to do these things, or willing to learn at least, please don't start service accommodation business in 2025. I promise you're going to fail. Now, on the other hand, if you're willing to learn, right? If you're hungry for cash flow, if you want cash flow, it's something that you want to actually get, because at the end of the day, a lot of people think service accommodation business is something that's going to get you rich over the long term. I'll be honest, right? The reason why I started my service accommodation business is mainly to gain cash flow in the short run. A service accommodation business is very, very good for cash flow. If you're willing to learn, if you're coachable, if you're adaptable, to the market, because the Airbnb market changes every week, every month, every year, right? If you're not willing to adapt, I promise you're going to fail in this business. But if you're willing to adapt, yeah, you can definitely do the service accommodation business. You're going to actually be very good at it, right? If you have time, if you have a lot of time on your hands. And I see some people, like I said, right, the people that tend to give the service accommodation business straight to a management company is those that don't have the time. Now, if you don't have time, please, I beg you, do not start a service accommodation business, because at the end of the day, you're going to fail. This industry is not get rich quick scheme. You're gonna need to be willing to learn, and to have the time to learn. So to be willing to learn, you need the time to learn as well. So at the end of the day, if you don't have the time to try and actually implement a system, implement what you've learned from probably YouTube, maybe if you have a coach, do not start this business. If you have the time, start the business, because at the end of the day, this business is a low barrier to entry business. Only really and truly, the thing that you have to start with is a little bit of money and a lot of time. And that's the main thing. Now, if I was starting my business, my service accommodation business this year, 2025, right, what would I do? First of all, I would absolutely not go to places like Birmingham, places like Manchester, places like London to get my first service accommodation, because if you're not experienced host, you are probably going to fail in these markets. I'd go to secondary markets like Nottingham, where, it's not boomed yet over there. Well, Nottingham's actually kind of booming over there, right? But places like Derby, but there's places like Shrewsbury, places like Gloucestershire. Those are areas where they're actually very, very historical towns in the UK, right? However, there's not a lot of service accommodations over there. People don't know about those areas. And on top of that, agents are not constantly getting 500 calls a day about, can I use your property as an Airbnb? It's kind of a new thing to them. So yeah, in those markets, they're probably going to be more, they may be more open to it, or they may need a bit more convincing, right? That's another thing I'd do, right? I'd also definitely start with rent to rent. I wouldn't start a service accommodation business straight away my first time, trying to just put a deposit in a house, buy a house. I'd either go with rent to rent or management, where it's a low barrier to entry, you don't have to put that much money in, right? But you can actually, you can cut your teeth and learn how the industry actually works, how to actually make money doing this thing. Is it even for you? Because a lot of people want to start certain businesses, right? There's been a lot of businesses I've started in my life, and I've got into it and I've realized, wait, I don't actually like this. And I remember one time I tried to start like a food delivery business. I hated it. I liked it for a little bit because it helped me drive around and I could listen to books, but apart from that, constantly getting out of my car, the stop-start motion of it, I hated it. You might get into service accommodation and realize you don't like dealing with housekeepers, you don't like dealing with guests, in service accommodation business, you're gonna be coming across a lot of different people on a day-to-day basis. And if you don't have the temperament to deal with different types of people, or you don't have someone on your team that can do that, you're gonna hate this industry, I promise you. And I was one of those people, I started hating it when I'm dealing with like moody guests one day, then happy guests the next day. Like, I need consistency, and Leah, my wife, knows how to deal with these people. If you're willing to build something, I'd probably, I'd definitely start with someone as well. I'd definitely start a service accommodation business with someone. I started with my partner, and I'll definitely advise with doing that, because at the end of the day, in this industry, business can be very lonely, especially when you're starting from the bottom. It can be extremely lonely. And the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about things yourself and not having a second opinion of someone that's actually invested into this thing with you. You need to start with someone. Again, I would say if you're gonna do it, you have a JV partner, you need to know who you're getting into business business with. That's number one. However, find the right people. There's definitely people out there that are right for you. You know, when we first started, we was gonna go into business with a JV partner, and it didn't work out. And I actually realized, you know what, it was two different type of people trying to get into a business together. That would have failed at some point. However, I ended up getting it with my wife, Aliyah. She's my girlfriend at the time. Yeah, I'd work with landlords, right? And agents who actually understand this industry. You actually understand that, you know what, you need nice properties. You need it to be presentable. The worst thing is when you have a landlord that doesn't understand this industry, they think they can just rent your property and they're not willing to put any money into it to make it work for you. Now, if you're willing to put the capital in, you might not need a landlord. However, for example, you might get neighbor complaints. If your landlord doesn't understand what you're doing and they don't understand that this can be some part of the industry, right? They'll just be getting scared and they'll just kick you out straight away. But they'll find loopholes in your contract, and you know, I think it's best to have harmony with people that you're working with. And these landlords and agents, if they understand the industry a little bit better, you actually sit them down and make them understand it, you know, it's definitely better than having a landlord that has no clue about seller's accommodation and you kind of just have to convince them. There's a difference between convincing and actually them understanding what you're doing with their property. They're two different things. And this is why I'm also against, like, because scripts are just based around convincing the landlord, convincing them that, oh yeah, this is what they should be doing. This is what they should be using the property for. This is what you're going to be using their property for. If a landlord understands what you're going to be doing, you kind of don't need to convince them, because the process of getting them to understand what you're going to be doing with their property is basically going to be convincing them anyway. And if they understand it, they don't agree with it, you don't convince them. But most of the time, especially when you when I say to landlords, for example, right, I'll say to them, look, why is service accommodation better for you as a landlord than, you know, giving it to normal families? We don't have the rental rights that especially these new governments has put in, right? So we have to pay your rent. If we don't pay your rent within 15 days or within the amount of days you say in the contract, you can change the locks. You can't do that with a normal tenant. So a lot of the times when they've already understand what I'm doing and then I hit them with that, trust me, they're like, yeah, you know what, you're right. Even with the landlords that are stuck in their ways, they get convinced by that. Because a lot of agents, right, they have to hear that from you. You have to go tell the landlord. It becomes like Chinese whispers where they don't actually put it across correctly, right? So that's why some agents will say, yeah, I'll speak to the landlord. The landlord will end up coming back saying no, because there's a lot of miscommunication about this industry, right? Another thing is, well, starting this year, right, I would build out my team. I'd build out my SOPs from the start. So from day one, everything I'm doing, I'm writing it on a Word document, Excel spreadsheet somewhere, so that when I bring someone onto my team, they also understand what I'm doing. Rather than me now then having to try to train them. It's so easy when you train someone. In fact, better yet, if you want to go to an extra mile, everything that you're doing, do videos. You can train people with those videos. You know, I build out systems, make sure I do cleaning checklists, have people that are checking in, you know, have call all my guests before they check in. Have the 3-step call system where you call them when they book, the day before they check in and after they check out, during their stay and after they check out, right? I think that's 4 steps. But anyway, right? These are the things that I put in place if I was starting today. I know people's systems it's become so overstated these days, because a lot of people kind of associate they associate systemizing with being hands-off. Systemizing is not being hands-off. Systemizing is putting its things in place so you eventually get to the point of being as hands-off as possible. Systemizing is not passive. Because even the process itself, to get systemized, you need to do the work yourself. But eventually, it can become as passive as possible. With some businesses, can never be passive. Some businesses, you can get to 60, 70, 80% passive. Like Airbnb, I'll probably say you can get to about 80, 90% passive as an owner, unless you're a super massive company and you have everything in one place. But you get to about 80, 90% passive, which is still decent, if you ask me. Another thing is focus on getting like repeat customers. That's one thing that I made a mistake, and I'm still making the mistake to this day. And I'm only recently I'm finding out the value in it, you know. Having contractors book, but giving them contractors extra special service where they book with you again, because one contractor could book out your Monday to Friday for 18 months. And you know, you don't have to worry about your Mondays to Fridays for 18 months. We've had that. And then the weekends is just kind of a breeze for you. You can choose if you want weekend bookings or not. Focus on contractor bookings, repeat custom. These things are key. This is why, for example, the hotel industry, this is why they're so big. A lot of hotels, even with the resurgence and the growth of Airbnb, hotels are still going. It's still going because they've mastered that repeat cost thing. So, like the mindset I'd go with if I started today is, I wouldn't try and get the most unit. It's not about having the most unit. It's about building a business that's lean and is just efficient and makes profit while being lean. Then you can scale, because you can use that leanness and you can scale with that lean mindset and keep going and still be profitable. So you basically be unstoppable. If I had this mindset when I first started, believe you me, in my stage right now, I'd have so much more money than I do right now. I'd be so much more far gone successful than I am right now. I've realized my mistakes and I'm gonna keep going. I'm actually gonna stop my car for this, right? Just to wrap this video up. You see, if you're willing to learn, you're adaptable, so you're malleable, you can go with the seasons, you're kind of like water, you know what I'm saying? If you have the right temperament, you have the right mindset to build a team, to build the systems, I'll be honest, you can start like a service accommodation Airbnb business in 2025. However, if you're looking for something to get rich quick, you know, you're just looking for something to just make money like this, Airbnb might work for you for your first unit. However, you're gonna quickly find out, like I did, this is a business. This is not some sort of eBay where I'm just putting the item on eBay and I'm getting bids or someone just buys it on eBay. This is actually a business, right? Actual competition. I basically say the Airbnb industry is kind of like the food industry. The food industry, there's people who make losses in that industry. There's people who win in that industry massively, right? There's high competition, but there's people who win and there's people who lose. Airbnb industry was, when it first started, there wasn't that much competition, so everyone was basically winning. But now, there's high competition, so you need to actually build a business. So find ways to differentiate yourself, make sure your customers are happy, make sure your vendors are happy, make sure all your systems are working as good as possible. And you have to put in the work. Because as long as you put in the work and you're willing to learn and you're willing to improve constantly, you can't fail. You literally can't.